Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch. In this final video of the Rich Notes app series, we'll wrap up the project by adding categories, sorting, and filtering to our notes. And you'll also learn how to enhance the list view with sliders, dates, and category colors to give your app a polished, professional finish. In the last video of this three-part series, we used the RichText editor created in the first video to create a new Rich Notes app and persist the notes to a SwiftData data source. We created two models, one for a RichText note, and each note can have an optional category. Then we implemented the CRUD operations for the RichText note, but we didn't fully flush out the app, and we have yet to create a way to add and apply categories to the notes. So in this final video, we'll be doing just that, as well as adding some extra features and functionality. This is a long video, so make sure that you take note of the chapter markers in the description if you want to take a break or jump to a specific section. By the end of this video, we will have introduced a slider that will let us view from 1 to 10 lines in the list view, and we'll be able to update the appearance of a row and also display the creation and the last updated dates. We still have the same options available to us in the text editor view, where we can stylize the text and get more options as well. We'll introduce the ability to choose a category or be able to edit existing categories or create new ones. Sorting will be introduced to allow us to sort by creation date, which is the default, or by last updated date. And finally, we'll give the user the ability to filter by category. I do have a starter project for this video, and I encourage you to download it from the link in the description. There are multiple branches, and if you want to work along with me, download the starter project branch for this video, which is the completed Rich Note app part 1 branch, which is the completed code from the second video in this series. You can either clone the repository or download the zipped archive. I always recommend that you work along with me, but if you'd prefer, you can also download the completed source code for this video, and that's the Rich Notes app part 2 branch. It's up to you. The first thing that I want to do before I create my slider is to update the note that is used in my preview, which is that static sample note, and I want to make sure that it has more content for the text. So in the RichText note model, you can update the static sample note to have more content like this. I'm going to replace the text with a multi-line string here. And in here, I can type in a couple of sentences like, "Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of the party." And I can give a couple of line breaks and then another line. "This is going to be a lot of fun." So now when we return to the preview, you'll see that that text is all there. Now, if I go to the text editor view, I can still go and stylize it. And it doesn't take much to realize that if you have a lot of notes here, or if you have a lot of text or large text sizes, the view is going to get out of hand, and you'll not be able to locate your note very easily. So what I propose that we do is limit the number of lines displayed in each note, but give the user the ability or the option to choose, say, from 1 to 10 lines. So in the Notes view, start by creating a numLines state property and set it to 1.0, and that's going to force it to be a double rather than an integer. Next, embed the list, including the list style modifier in the VStack. And then as the second element in the VStack, add a slider and use the slider value as the initializer. Now the value is going to be bound to numLines in the range of 1 through 10. So embed the slider then in its own VStack so that below it we can present a text view that's going to display the number of lines selected. Now the problem here is it shows 1 line, and it should just be 1 line, singular. Now what we can do is surround the interpolated numLines and the string lines with square brackets, and then add a set of parentheses, and within there the string inflect : true, And then in front of the square brackets, add a caret. Now you can see that it says one line singular. So let's add some padding to the VStack. As I move the slider, I see it goes from line to lines. So all we have to do is to go back to where the note is presented in the text view and set a line limit to the num lines converted to an integer. Now as you slide the slider, the number of lines displayed changes, but the default is displaying one line when the view is presented. So let's also improve what's displayed in the list view cell, or the row. Above the text with the note, create an H-stack. And this is where I'm going to present the category. So I'm going to use that category. So I'll repeat this with an if-let clause. And then instead of displaying a category name stylized in the color, what I want to do is display a circle with a fill using the hex initializer, using the category's hex color and force unwrap it. But I'm also going to set the frame to a width of 15. Now, if there isn't a category, I'm going to display a circle, but I'm going to fill it with a background color so that it basically disappears. And the frame is still going to be set to a width of 15 here as well. Then as the second element in the H-stack, I'm going to display a text view that'll display the note.category.name. But since category is optional, we can use a nil coalescer and then present the static string category.uncategorized. Remember, that's the string that just is uncategorized. We set that up in our category model. And we can remove that old category text view now. And you can see, because the sample note has a category assigned, that we see the red circle next to the category name. If you enter a new note and add some text and then return, you'll see that it is uncategorized and that the circle is the same color as the background color. So to finish off this cell, let's create a text view for the creation date and also include the last updated date. But I'm going to do that in a VStack that is aligned to the trailing edge of the row. So I'm going to enclose the updated date text view in a VStack with the alignment set to trailing. Above that, I'm going to create a new text view and just display the note.createdOn property using a style set to date. And then to the VStack, I'm going to apply a font that's a caption font, but I also want it to be italic. And it's aligned to the right, but I want to push the entire VStack to the trailing edge. So I'm going to apply a frame where the width is set to infinity, but the alignment set to trailing. So now we're seeing both the creation date and the updated date. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. And be sure to subscribe to my channel and enable notifications. You can also subscribe to my newsletter that comes out on Wednesdays 2 or 3 times a month. I'll leave a link in the description. The newsletter will tell you about my current and future videos, along with other things that I discover along my coding and personal journey that I think you might find interesting. If you enjoy my content and you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. A link's in the description. And if you become a $5 a month monthly member, you can get access to all of my videos, sometimes up to a month before they're released on YouTube. So let's move on. In the Notes Editor view, let's create a query to fetch all of the categories. And I want to do that by providing a sort based on the key path of the category.name. And that's going to get us an array of category that I can call categories. Now I can embed the text editor in a VStack with an alignment of leading. And then I'm going to move that padding from the text editor onto the VStack. Now, inside there, as the first element, I'm going to create an H-stack. And as the first item in the H stack, I want to check to see if, in fact, categories is empty. If it is, I'm going to display a text view with the string using no categories. If it's not empty, then I want to display a picker. So the picker's label is simply going to be the string category, but we'll need a selection to bind it to. So let's create a state variable that I'm going to be calling selected category, and that's going to be a string. And we can use one of our static properties, which is the category.uncategorize. And that's going to allow us to make it an optional category. Well, now we can bind the pickers to the selection of selected category. As the first item in the picker, I'm going to create a text view displaying that same static string, the category uncategorized, and tag it with the same string, category uncategorized. Then we can use a for each loop to iterate over the categories, because there are some now, and display a text view with the name of the category. And we'll be able to tag it with also the name of the category. I'm going to set the button style of the picker to bordered. Now, when a selection is made, we want to be able to update the note.category. So I'm going to create an onChange modifier here on our picker based on the selected category state property. We don't need the old or new value. We just need that selected category. So we can then use an if-let to find the category where the first match in the categories array is when the name is equal to that selected category string. If it finds it, then we can apply that the note.category. So if someone selected uncategorized, it wouldn't find that as one of our categories, and it would just leave it at nil. So else then we set it to nil. Then we can use a try context save to persist the changes right away. Next, I want to create a button that's going to allow me to add or edit a category. So I'm going to create a button with the label being an image, and that image is going to use a system name of square and pencil. I'll set the button style to be bordered prominent, and then I'm going to apply a clip shape of a circle. And I'm going to apply a tint. So if the note.category is not nil, meaning it's been assigned, then I can use the color that is the note.category's hex color. And we can safely unwrap that because we would have assigned the categories itself. If not, then we'll just use an accent color. That's if it's uncategorized. Now, this uncategorized note is my sample notes category, but it should be important. So when the view appears, we have set it to the value of the note.category that is passed in. So what I want to do is create an onAppear modifier, and then I can use an if-let to unwrap the category, which is going to be equal to the note.category. And then if it's found it, then we can make the selected category equal to the category name. Now we see it's got the correct preview name and color for that category. For the action, I want to toggle a modal sheet that will present a category editor that we have yet to create. So I'm going to create a new state variable called editing category. It's a Boolean, and we're going to default it to false. And then for the action in our button, then what I can do is I can toggle that value. And then we can apply a sheet modifier where is presented is going to be bound to that edit categories. And it's within here will present a categories view that we have yet to create. Well, we can test what we have right now to see if we can assign a category to a note. So from the notes view, let me create a new note. Originally, it's uncategorized. I'm going to enter some text. But now what I'm going to do is I can pick a category from the list. And notice that as I pick the category, the background gets tinted with that category's color. And when I return to the notes view in the preview, we see that note with the right category information. Now we need to create that view that's going to allow us to create and edit categories. So let's create a new SwiftUI file inside our views folder, and we can call it categories view. Now, once it's created, I'd like to prepend the number 3 to that view name in the navigation pane. Again, that's going to give us the sort order that I want. It's the order in which I can view things. Now we can import SwiftData in that view. And since this is going to be presented as a modal sheet, we'll also need to be able to dismiss it. So we need a dismiss property that is formed from the environment's dismiss key path. And if I'm going to be updating, I'll also need access to the model context. So again, another environment variable using the model context key path. And I'm just going to call this variable context. And finally, we will need all of the categories. So we can use that same query that we used in the notes editor view to fetch all of the categories. So I'm just going to copy it from there. Now this view is going to be used for creating new categories or editing existing categories for the given note. So I'm going to create an enum for the cases that I need. And that enum is going to be called action, and it's going to be a string. So there are actually 3 cases. The first case is going to be new, and I'll use the string new category. The second case will be edit, and the string will be edit category. And the third case is when I'm neither creating a new one or editing one, the case is going to be none, and I'll just use the string categories. So let's see how we can use that. So let's create a new state property called action that is going to be initialized with the action of none, meaning when this view gets presented, it neither knows if I'm editing or creating a new one. I'm going to have a button that will allow me to initiate the creation of a new category. So I'm going to create a new state property called new category as a Boolean property, and I'm going to initialize that as false so that I'm going to trigger it as true if I want to create a new category and deal with that result. Well, we're going to need properties for both the category name and the category color. So I'm going to initialize the category name as an empty string. And even though we use a string for our color, what I'm actually going to use for the hex color is actually going to be a color itself that I'm going to initialize as the color primary, because I'm going to use this in a color picker. When we present this view, we have no idea if a category has already been selected. So what I want to do is to create a state property called selected category. That's going to be an optional category. And if we're going to select one of the categories to edit, that's when it's going to assign that value to the selected category. So those are all the properties that we need to create our view and the logic behind these 3 options. First, when this view is presented, we can check to see if the categories is empty, meaning we haven't created any yet. And if this is the case, we can create a content unavailable view. And we can use the title, create your first category. And then for the system image, I'm going to use pencil.and.scribble. So right now you should see the content unavailable view because our preview has no idea that we have some categories. Well, that is until you add the mock data trait to the preview. And when you do that, that content unavailable view disappears, which means it must have found those two categories that we have in our mock data. So let's list them. We've got that query that grabs them all. So I'm going to create a list. I'm going to set the list style to plain. And then within the list, I can create a for each loop on the array of categories to iterate over them. So I'll create an H stack. And then I'm going to create an image this time instead of a circle. And I'm just going to use the system name circle.fill. But I'll set a foreground style using the color hex initializer that is the category's hex color. And then I can display the text view using the category name. Now, if the action is not a new case, it means we want to push a button off to the right-hand side that's going to allow the user to tap on it to edit the particular selected row. So we'll use a spacer, and then I'm going to create a button. And for the label, I'm going to use a system image displaying a pencil. For the button action, then, that's what's going to happen when we tap on that edit button. So what do we want to do? Well, I'm going to use an animation block in here. And I'm also going to then set the action state variable to the edit case. And then I'm going to set the selected category, the optional, to the category that is being iterated over. And then I can assign to the category name in our text field the category name. And then for the hex color, I'm going to assign it the color using the hex initializer of the category's hex color. And I want to enable swipe delete. So to the for each loop, I want to attach an onDelete modifier. And that's going to allow us to get all of the indices. And then I can use a for index in the indices set to use a context delete method to delete the one of the categories at that index. Then, though not really necessarily required, but what I like to do is to issue a try context save here to force an immediate update. Now I want to enclose all of this inside a navigation stack. And then within the navigation stack, I want all of that content in the if-else clause again, and enclose it in a group or a v-stack so that I can apply some navigation title and some padding. So I'm going to use a v-stack. And I will apply some padding to the v-stack. Now I can apply a navigation title that is going to be that action's raw value. That's why we made it a string. And let's set the navigation bar title display mode to inline. Now on the toolbar, I want two buttons, one on the leading edge to dismiss and the other one on the trailing edge to allow the user to create a new category. So I'm going to create a toolbar method here, and inside there, two toolbar items. The first toolbar item will have a placement of top bar leading, and the button that I want in here is a special button that has a role of close. And the action is going to be dismiss. And because it has a rule of close, you'll see that the button in the toolbar becomes that X mark. The second toolbar item is going to have a placement of top bar trailing. And for the button here, I'm going to use the label image system name plus. The action will be to simply set the action enum property to the new case. I'll need one more function, and that will be to reset our state properties after we created a new category. So I'm going to call that function reset. And it's going to set all 4 properties back to their default values. For the action, it will be reset to the none case, the category name to an empty string, the hex color will go back to the primary color, and our selected category will be reset to nil. Now let me refactor and fix this typo for selected category. Well, right now the default action is none, but if I tap on the plus or the new button, this changes. So I can present a text field for a new or edited text category, along with a color picker for the category's hex color. So I'm going to temporarily change the initialized action here to new. Notice how the edit button has gone. So it's assuming that we are likely in the new case where we've tapped on that new button. So in a VStack, before the list if else clause, I'll need to check to see if the action is actually not equal to none. If it isn't, it means then it's either an edit or new. What I can do is I can create an HStack. And inside the HStack, I can display a text field with the label category name, and that would be bound to the category name state property. And I'll set the style to a rounded border. And then I can follow this in the HStack with a color picker using the label color, but the selection will be bound to the hex color state property. But I also want to specify that supports opacity is false. And then I can hide the label with a label is hidden. Still in the HStack, I want to check to see if that category name text field is not empty. And I can do that by checking to see if not category name by trimming characters in white space and new lines is empty. And then if that's the case, then I can display a button. And the label for that button, I'm going to use another image that is a system name of checkmark. And I'll set the button style to bordered prominent. So now you can see in the preview that the button only appears when I've entered some text into the category name field. Now there are 2 cases to deal with then. One if the action is new, and the other if the action is edit. And if this is the category that has been selected, then the selected category is no longer nil. So we can use an if let to unwrap the selected category, which must be in the actions edit case then. And then we can find that category in the categories array by finding the first category where the ID is equal to the selected category ID. And when it's found it, then what we can do is we can update the found category name to the category name. And then we can use that function on the hex color string that I have in my extensions folder to convert it to a hex color and apply it to the found category. Then you can safely unwrap this here because the only way this could have been set was using a picker. Else, we must be in the new case. So we can create a new category using the category name for the name. And the hex color string then will need to convert the bound hex color that was set by the color picker or the default initializer to a hex value as a string. And then we can insert that into the context. And then in both cases, whether we're updating or editing, we'll use a try to use the context save method. And then I'll use an animation block to reset the properties to their default. Let's change the action then back to none, which is our default. I can return now to the Notes Editor view, and in the sheet that is toggled by the Edit Categories, we can display our new Categories view. One thing though, if we return from the categories view after editing the name or color of the category that was already selected, we'll need to make sure that the selected category string is also updated. So I'm going to create an onDismiss block in the sheet by adding an onDismiss argument. And then in the closure, I can set the selected category to be the note.category name, but category is optional. So if it is, we can use a nil coalescer to set it to the static category uncategorized string. So we can test this out right here now. If I go to Notes View now and select a note, I can go to the category and I can edit the category and change the name. When I return to the list view, I see that it's been updated here too. Well, let me create a new note. Now I'd like to create a new category for this note. So I'm going to call this category meeting, and I'm going to pick a color, like this purple color. This gets added to my category list, which I can now use and pick it for my note. It's all working as expected. If you're still with me, let's finish this off now by adding the ability to filter the list by category and be able to sort by either the date created or the last updated property. So what we'll need is we'll have to create some pickers in the list view for both of those options. So in the notes view, create two new state variables. The first one is going to be called sort by creation, and that's a Boolean that I'll default to true. So the default sort order is going to be by creation date. And for the second one, I'm going to call it filter category, and that one's going to be a string. And we're going to default that to the static category of all, which is going to default to the static category all string, which is all categories. And that is going to mean that we are going to have a filter and display all the categories initially. So let's change the group here now to a VStack. And then as the first element in the VStack, I'm going to create an HStack. And it's here that I want to present my two pickers. And each of those two pickers are going to be in a VStack. So the first VStack will use a picker for the sort order. And the selection is going to be bound to sort by creation. And then we can create a text view displaying creation date as the string, but we'll tag that to be true. And then the second will be another text view displaying last updated, and that will be tagged as false. Those are our two cases for sorting. And then below that VStack, I'm going to create a text view displaying the string sort order. Next in the HStack, I want to present a picker for all of the categories, as well as a choice for all categories and uncategorized. So let's first create a query that will fetch all of the categories, and I'm going to use the category name key path as a sort argument to get that array of categories. And then we can create, next to that first VStack picker, another VStack in the HStack, and create a picker using the title category picker, and the selection is going to be bound to our filter category. Now the first item in the content is going to use the category all static property in a text view, which is all categories, and we'll use that as the tag as well. Below that is another one, another text view for the static uncategorized. And the tag is going to be the same static string. And once we have that, we can use the categories array in a for each loop. And we'll be able to display in a text view the category name with the tag for the row being the category name as well. And then as the final item in the VStack, we can display a text view with the string category. And finally, I'd like to set the button style on both to be bordered. What I'd like to do is to add a sort descriptor and a predicate to the query that'll fetch all of the notes and have it sort and filter when I make a change to one of the pickers. Well, this is a problem as we have it here because I can't update this query with those properties now as it's already been initialized. So the solution is to move this entire list view into its own separate view and perform the query in that view where we can pass in changes as an initializer to refresh the query each time those changes are made. So I'm going to cut out the entire if-else clause from the notes view where the notes is not empty and keep it on my clipboard. And then I'm going to create a new view that I'll call Notes List View. And then I can replace the text view with what we had just cut out. Of course, you're going to get all sorts of errors. Let's return to the Notes view, and I'm going to cut out the query for notes. I don't need it there. I need it now in my new view. So I'm going to return to there and make sure first that I import SwiftData. And now I can paste in the query. And the other thing that's here is the slider. So I'm going to return to the Notes view and cut out the numLines property. And then go back to my Notes List view and paste it in there. And I'll need one more thing, and that's the environment property for the model context key path that I'll call context. And if I add my mock data trait to the preview, you'll see that single node in the list. So I can return to the notes view where you cut the if-else clause here and replace it with an instance of the notes list view. And you'll see nothing has changed now, but we're still not sorting or filtering. We have to be able to pass in that sort by and the filter category properties to the notes list view. And that will then force updates on that subview. But before you do that, let's add a prefix of 1.1 to the notes list view so that I can tell that it is a subview of the notes view. Back in the notes list view then, I'm going to add an initializer that's going to accept the sort by creation properties, that is a Boolean, and the filter category, that is a string. Since that's an initializer, we'll need to fix the preview by adding some values for those two. So we'll just use true for the sort by creation. And for the filter category, we'll use category.all. But those are just for the preview. When we present this view, that's back in our notes view, which is now complaining. But what we will be passing in are the actual sort by creation variables and the filter category variables. So now within the initializer, we're able to create our sort descriptors and our predicate and update our query. So in the initializer, we can let sort descriptors be an array of sort descriptor of rich text note types. And then I can use an if clause to check to see if sort by creation is true. If it is, then the array is a single sort descriptor using the key path RichTextNote.createdOn and set the sort order to reverse. So the most recent is going to be first. If the sort by creation is false, that's our second case. We can use the same sort descriptor, but change it to updated on. That'll handle sorting. So next we can create a predicate based on what the filter query string is, and then use the sort and the predicate to update our query. So let's create a switch statement on filter category, and we can inspect three cases. The first case is when we want all categories. So category.all, that string. The second case will be when it's uncategorized. So the category.uncategorized static string. And then the default case will be all other cases, which will have an actual value of the filter category being passed in. So in the case of all, there's not a filter on categories at all. So our query can simply be updated by passing in the sort descriptors, and we'll need to use an underscore notes here to create the query with the sort passing in just the sort descriptors. No predicate. Now, if the case is uncategorized, we'll need to first create a predicate for the RichText note type, and then return the cases where the note category is nil. And then we can update our notes by creating a query using the filter this time of the predicate and our sort descriptors. Well, for the default case then, we can simply copy that previous one from the uncategorized. But in our predicate, what we need to do is to only return the note where the category name contains the filtered category, if that's true. Notes will still have the predicate and the sort descriptors. So finally, we can test. And back in Notes view, I can test and see that my category filtering is working fine because I only have one, so I can select different categories and see if it gets displayed or not. Now, I've actually completed the project and I've added some more categories to my simulator version. So let me show you how it's working. I'm going to run this then on the simulator. I have 3 notes in the simulator. Selecting the filter, I see that I have 3 categories, so I can filter on each one of them. None of them are uncategorized, however. So let me create a new note then that is uncategorized. Now I can see that when I select uncategorized. Now the new note is showing here at the top because I'm sorting by creation date in reverse. Now if I choose last updated, I see that it's still at the top too because it was also the last updated note. So let me edit an older note. When I return to the list view, it's now being displayed at the top. Great. Well, that completes this project. And I hope that over the course of these last 3 videos that you've learned something that you'll be able to incorporate into your own projects if you're using attributed strings and or SwiftData. Thanks to all of you for sticking with me. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps. And remember, you can get access to my videos by downloading my free channel listing app for the Mac, or you can use the web version on an iPhone or an iPad to get better searching and viewing of my content. Links are in the description.